A favourable forecast, but even rain won't stop Canada's wildfire from spreading. The government is warning the blaze in Alberta will continue to grow over the coming days, even though its speed may slow down. Clashes between protesters and police outside Greece's parliament as it debates a controversial tax and pensions reform plan. The country has been crippled by a 48-hour strike. Now, Parliament will vote on that reform bill, one of the conditions set by Eurozone leaders for Greece's next bailout instalment. And Beirut has voted in municipal elections. It's the first time anyone in Lebanon has voted in any kind of election for 6 years. The country has been without a president for the last 2. Local elections will continue throughout the month. Hello, you're watching France 24. I'm Belle Lupton. And to our top story, and Canada, where the weather forecast may include cooler weather and even a chance of rain. But the government says the wildfire raging in Alberta will continue to grow. It's been a week since the blaze started near the town of Fort McMurray. Almost 100,000 people have been evacuated from their homes and whole neighbourhoods have been destroyed. Well, for more on that, let's talk to Craig McCulloch in Vancouver. And Craig, there was a press conference earlier. The fire is still spreading, they said, but it could be that it's spreading less fast now than it was.
That's correct, Bill. It's still about 30 to 40 kilometers away from the province of Saskatchewan, which is the next province east from Alberta. And winds are expected to go up towards gusts of about 70 kilometers an hour. But on the good news, as you say, the temperatures are falling and the humidity is on the increase, which is good if you're fighting a forest fire. Right now, it is about 161,000 hectares, which is about 1,610 square miles, which is like all of Paris, all of Vancouver, all of New York City on fire. And it's absolutely huge. Good news about the fire spreading, though, is that the part of Saskatchewan it is going into, there's no major human settlements, there's no infrastructure, maybe the odd farm. Canada being the second largest landmass in the world, there's a lot of empty space.
And where are the local government on working out not only how much damage has been done, but also how they're going to go about the cleanup?
Well, you're going to see some first pictures shot by the media coming out tomorrow. Right now, the government is doing what's called re-entry procedures, which kind of sounds like the space shuttle coming down to land. But they're going to be going in there with electrical workers, with utility workers, with some insurance companies, just to get a first peek. And they want to look at a number of things. They want to see how badly the power grid is damaged, what would need to be repaired, how bad are the telephone lines, what would have to be repaired, how are the pipes doing, the pipes that carry gas, that carry water to houses and grey water and other things away from the houses. Just what damage is there going to be? 1,600 buildings have been impacted by this fire. How bad are they? How many are completely destroyed? How many maybe can be repaired and how many are just simply gone?
Lots to look at over the next few days. Thank you very much. That's Craig McCulloch speaking to us from Vancouver. Now, they've brought the country to a standstill over the last 48 hours with a general strike. Now, Greek trade unions are keeping up the pressure with protests across Greece. Demonstrators clashed with police outside the parliament in Athens. They threw firebombs, chairs and anything else they could get their hands on at the police, who retaliated with tear gas and stun grenades. Now, it's all over a controversial tax and pensions overhaul demanded by the Eurozone in return for the next bailout instalment. Parliament is in session right now to vote on that reform bill. Carl Brown has more.
Thousands again took to the streets of Athens to denounce the latest austerity measures which Greece must implement to obtain crucial financial assistance. Cuts to pensions are being proposed, as well as a hike in income tax and social security contributions. Greeks are angry that they're being asked to pay more and make do with less.
Today, the working class must send a message that with this unemployment and part-time work, the low-income earners, the self-employed and the unemployed, cannot live on salaries and pensions of 300 to 400 euros.
Greek workers held a general strike on Friday and Saturday in protest against austerity measures demanded by the country's creditors. The International Monetary Fund and the European Union want Greece to pay more into what they feel is an extravagant pension system and reduce payouts. Parliamentary approval of the reforms could unlock the next loan installment of 5 billion euros. Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras, elected on a campaign against austerity, must implement a comprehensive package of austerity measures for the country's third bailout since 2010, agreed with the EU and IMF last July and worth 86 billion euros. The finance ministers of the Eurozone are due to meet on Monday to discuss Greece's calls for debt relief and to assess its latest package of policy reforms. On the margins of Sunday's demonstrations, a handful of youths threw flaming projectiles at police, who responded with tear gas.
Well, earlier I spoke to our correspondent in Athens, Natalie Savarikas. I asked her whether the Prime Minister, Alexis Tsipras, could survive this.
It is a big test for his administration. There's a lot of anger coming from within the ranks of the party. We've heard it of the way he's managed. For example, like this was a vote that was essentially had to be voted, next week, not today. So, he's brought it forward. It's angered many people, and it's essentially the way we're seeing it. We were hearing in Parliament earlier today, the head of the Communist Party saying these are barbaric measures. The opposition party, for example, also rising in the polls. He's trailing behind Alexis Tsipras. So he knows a lot is at stake. It's probably he'll be able to pass these through. He has a very slim majority in Parliament of 3 lawmakers that'll probably, support him. But it's very likely this will be the last batch of painful measures that we'll be able to pass. And that's the big question. If Europe, the Eurogroup finance ministers tomorrow and the International Monetary Fund request additional cuts, additional tax hikes, it's unlikely they'll be able to pass. So this is the final test, it seems, for the administration of Alexis Tsipras, who actually, was an administration which was voted into power by seeking to protect the poor, when at the moment it's actually implementing more cuts and more tax hikes, which actually will affect the very poor.
Natalie Savarikas in Athens. Turkey says it's killed 55 Islamic State group fighters in northern Syria. They died in shelling, a retaliation for weeks of IS rocket attacks on the Turkish border town of Kilis. Turkish officials have said they need more help from Western allies in defending Kilis and the border. 3 Turkish soldiers have been killed by a bomb in the country's southeast. They were deployed there as part of Turkey's battle against Kurdish fighters. Fighting between Turkish security forces and the Kurdish PKK erupted again last summer after the collapse of a 2-year ceasefire. Since then, hundreds of Turkish security forces and several thousand Kurdish rebels have been killed. Polls have closed in parts of Lebanon that were voting in municipal elections today. Beirut and the Bekaa Valley were up first. They'll be followed by 5 other provinces over the next 3 weeks. These are the first elections of any kind in Lebanon in 6 years. And for many, they're a chance to steer the country out of political paralysis. Earlier, I spoke to our correspondent, Adam Pletz, who's in Beirut. I asked him what these elections mean for Beirutis.
From leaks from people who are counting, it's suggested that the Beiruti list looks like it's going to do well, take the lion's share of the votes. That's the list of the establishment political parties, if you like. But the very fact that this election was able to go ahead today in such an atmosphere in Lebanon where all other political processes have pretty much come to an end. You have no president, you have parliament that votes itself an extension, and you have gridlock between the different political blocs. So the fact that these elections were held is something in itself. So there have been 2 new organizations who've made a very firm secular stance, something that very much goes against the tide of politics here in Lebanon. Most of the political parties are very closely tied to a sectarian group. So in that respect, yes, but as I was saying, it looks like the results are going to lean in favor of the establishment parties. But nonetheless, if these new groups, the two of them in particular, Beirut Madinati, that's Beirut My City, is my city rather, and Citizens Within a State, of either of these two new organizations can take at least some of the seats in the Beirut Municipal Council, then they'll feel that they've made some headway. And that's building on traction that they've had recently following the demonstrations after the trash crisis of last year, which drew a lot of people out into the streets, many of them very vocally demonstrating against the political elite, the established political elite here, and calling for a much more secular approach to politics.
Adam Pletz in Beirut speaking there. Now, Israel's Prime Minister says he will not stop trying to destroy Hamas's tunnels which run underneath Gaza. Benjamin Netanyahu said destroying the tunnels was necessary to Israeli security. He was speaking after the worst violence in 2 years between Israel and Gaza. Recent exchanges have raised concerns for the future of an informal truce that has held since the 2014 conflict ended. Here's the Israeli Prime Minister.
Israel will continue to act as long as it takes to discover and thwart the tunnels in the south. We do not spare the means and resources to provide security to residents living alongside the Gaza border. In the past 2 years, these communities have been blessed with a significant rise of new residents, and we are acting to continue this trend. We don't seek escalation, but we will not be deterred from doing what's necessary to maintain security.
That was Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu. Afghan officials have hanged 6 Taliban-linked prisoners. They'd been convicted of carrying out militant strikes across Afghanistan. This is the first in a series of executions, all part of the president's new hardline policy against the Taliban, which began last month after a terrorist attack left 64 people dead in Kabul. The Taliban has promised revenge attacks against the government offices that carried out these executions. And France's president has commemorated Europe's World War II Victory Day by paying his respects at the tomb of the unknown soldier here in Paris. It could be the last time François Hollande carries out this ceremonial duty. France is holding general elections next year, and Hollande hasn't yet announced whether he means to run.
Clear skies over the Champs-Élysées as a cavalcade escorts François Hollande to the tomb of the unknown soldier, where he lays a wreath to pay tribute. Also present, France's top politicians and figures of the Socialist Party. Emmanuel Macron, the economy minister, Ségolène Royal, the environment minister. Former President Nicolas Sarkozy was also given a prominent spot. Amid the solemn ceremony, the political undertones couldn't be ignored a year before France's presidential elections.
On May the 8th of next year, the elections would have taken place and there will be a new president. Is today then a little bit different from the previous years?
No, the only information I can give you is that I will be here next May 8th. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
But apparently the president had more to say. Going back to the microphone, he summed up his achievements in the same manner one would in a campaign.
We've put the country on a good path for the past 4 years. I'm doing everything I can to facilitate redistribution within the limits of public finances. And this doesn't mean dole-outs. I don't subscribe to this idea.
A day of reflection, not just on the anniversary of Europe's World War II victory, but also on what could transpire between today and next May.
Now, if you've ever visited Paris, you might have taken a stroll down the Champs-Élysées. And picturesque as it is somewhat spoiled by a sea of traffic and the smoke and noise that comes with that. But not today, because today the Champs-Élysées was only for pedestrians. It's all part of a new initiative from Paris's mayor to ban traffic from this iconic avenue once a month. And Anne Hidalgo couldn't have chosen a better day to launch the project. It's been a whopping 27 degrees here in Paris today. That's it for the minute, but don't go anywhere. Plenty more news and analysis coming up after the break. Do stay with us if you can.